Air India is back in the news once again and once again for not the right reasons. This time, the national carrier is accused of putting at risk the lives of thousands of passengers every day on its Delhi-Melbourne route. The bone of contention is that the crew on this sector is being made to fly 17 to 18 hours and perform 2 consecutive landings without the prescribed mandatory rest period. Here's an exclusive report by our correspondent Pankaj Upadhyay.
The mess in Air India has touched another milestone. And this time the airline is being accused of using commercial flights for carrying out a risk assessment analysis. The study involves testing whether crew flying a loaded passenger aircraft can be made to work extra hours on the Australia sector. With adequate rest, the test involves extending the Delhi-Melbourne flight to Sydney, using the same crew to fly the additional sector, raising the crew's work time from 13 to 17 hours.
This means pushing the endurance levels of the crew. While earlier they would take rest after the single landing at Melbourne, the risk assessment analysis is now ostensibly trying to assess whether extra flying hours will have any impact on the fatigue or not. A test which the Air India employees believe should not be conducted on loaded passenger flights.
Curiously, while Air India claims that they have the necessary permission from the Director General of Civil Aviation, the apex body which lists out norms for safe air travel, an RTI response suggests no such permission was provided to conduct the test on passenger aircraft. Air India Chairman and Managing Director Rohit Nandan reiterated the position.
I cannot respond to an RTI query which has been answered by someone. As far as I am concerned, as far as Air India is concerned, we are still in the process of doing the risk assessment as required by the DGCA, and we are working with it.
A crew member flying on the Australian sector termed this move risky.
Risk analysis data is like if they are now creating a situation if the crew don't get to double landings, if they don't get horizontal rest, what are the implications on the flight? They fail to understand that they are doing it real time. And you are keeping the passengers and you're keeping the crew also in the dark when you're conducting this. See, the company is failing to understand that there is no written permission from anybody and nobody does a risk analysis management on a commercial flight.
Air India's aggressive employees union has now begun petitioning everyone, from DGCA to the Prime Minister, claiming risk assessment analysis on passenger aircraft illegal and putting at risk lives of passengers. They're backing up their claim with data to suggest the risk element on Air India's Australian flights was thrice the desirable level.
In order to supplement their point, Air India Union details how the crew rest area in the aircraft, that is the space where the crew is allowed to rest on long-haul flights, is badly designed in the Dreamliner aircrafts, preventing adequate quality rest. But the one and big question which remains unanswered is whether India's national carrier had the nod from the Director General of Civil Aviation for conducting such tests or not. And which document is right? The permission letter or the RTI query response? This is Pankaj Upadhyay in New Delhi, reporting for Headlines Today.
So there you have it. There are 2 documents. Both of which our civil aviation correspondent Pankaj Upadhyay has access to. Air India says one thing, the RTI answer says quite another. But the substance of the story is it in any way appropriate? Is it safe for Air India to conduct an experiment of this kind on an operational and very busy sector between India and Melbourne in Australia? Joining me this evening, Pankaj Upadhyay, correspondent who has brought us this investigation once again, throwing a spotlight on just how intriguing, if I may use an understated word, civil aviation and flying every day can possibly be. Kanu Gohain, former Director General of Civil Aviation, thank you, sir, for joining us live from Kolkata. And with us in the studio is Air Vice Marshal Kapil Kak, an aviation expert and a person who has written extensively and observed extensively on the state of both military and civil aviation in the country. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. Pankaj, if I could start with you first, since you reported this story, has there been a reaction at all from Air India, from the Director General of Civil Aviation about the story that you've done? Where is the clarification? Where is the clarity?
Shiv, quite surprising. DGCA is not responding either to our emails or our SMSs. DGCA does not bother to reply back to the calls that we give. So this is very, very surprising. Air India says they are relying on international standards. But I have the entire report, not just the RTI query response, but the internal Air India report as well. And here are the two-liners where the report says that the cabin crew alertness and ability to react proactively to abnormal emergency situations will be severely compromised. Air India CMD says that he is relying on international data. Now the internal report says that they had access to the international data, which says that there was no scientific evidence to support that the rest taken in ordinary economy seats would allow for restorative sleep. Other data says cabin crew reached highest level of fatigue and pilots toward the end of the flight.
Yes.
Now, sure, these are the technical details. On the human side as well, this cannot go on forever. If you're not able to sort out this problem with the union, why should the passengers suffer? Now, this is a hilarious situation where the crew on board is saying that the lives of passengers are at risk. We are not in any sort of a situation to control the emergency scenario. What is the aviation ministry doing? Why doesn't the DGCA reply? Air India on his part has just one quote to say, we are relying on international standards. Perhaps they might be in a position because of the kind of culture that they have in the airlines. As far as Air India is concerned,
let me bring in a crew member of Air India. We're not going to divulge his identity, obviously, because he's still employed with Air India, but we can treat him as a whistleblower because he's chosen to speak out. Sir, thank you for speaking to us here on Headlines today. How bad is it, experimenting of this kind on an operational, route like Delhi-Melbourne? How, just put this into context for us as a crew member. How inappropriate and dangerous is this?
You are risking the passenger's life. Nobody's understanding this. The fatigue factor at the end is at 16 points. That means death, in case of an emergency, death is going to be death. Not only one single death, many deaths are inevitable. What are we looking at? Are we waiting for an incident to happen? All instructions are given verbally. In writing, the DGCA says no dispensation has been given. 185 emails to them. There is no reply, no action taken against any officers. How is this happening? You see, I mean, it is surprising, I have to put it very bluntly that some people for their promotions are willing to do anything and everything and put lives at risk.
Kanu Gohen, how are you reading this? Who needs to be answerable for this kind of situation? First of all, do you agree that this is inappropriate and something needs to be done about this lack of clarity and experimentation where Air India said that they are following international standards, the DGCA has cleared it, the RTI reveals something else entirely? Kanu Gohen, where do you stand?
First of all, for the benefit of your viewers, let us say that what is happening in Air India is not correct.
Yes.
The DGCA India has issued civil aviation requirements specifying the time for flying, time for duty, both for the cabin crew as well as the cockpit crew. If that document, which has been produced in the form of a civil aviation requirement of this country, which has got the backup of the law, then Air India as an operator, scheduled operator, must follow that documentation. Second point which you have stated, which your correspondent has stated, with regard to doing risk assessment study and copying international standards. This is not the way of doing it. I do not know what new methodologies are being adopted by Air India. Because when these rules are framed, then we had consulted international practices, not standards. There are practices of other airlines. Then we have in the Air Force, the Aeromedical Center, which AVM Kak will be able to explain.
Yes, I'm going to bring you in on that.
They do those analyses. We have analyses from NASA also on human factor in the American NASA. Now, let me tell you that the landing phase of an aeroplane is very critical. Now, if somebody has introduced the fatigue factor, if a pilot at the fag end of the flight gets fatigued because not adhering to the flight duty time or the flight time limitation, then in such a scenario, if there is an emergency for an aeroplane while on landing, how does he react? That is very, very important.
Let me bring in Air Vice Marshal Kak in on that. Air Vice Marshal Kak, as Kanu Gohain just said, there are ways of being able to ascertain, fatigue data and other such data if the carrier requires to. Why do they need to experiment, in such a way that the lives of hundreds of passengers in a sector are obviously put at risk? There's no denying that it's a risk.
No, absolutely. Shiv,
and civil aviation already has its inherent dangers.
Shiv, absolutely, there is no doubt. The fact is that civil aviation requirement procedures laid down by DGCA relate to both flight time as also flight duty limitation time. That means overarching framework. The figures that are talked about is 11 to 13 hours of flight time and 16 hours of total flight duty time. Now here is where we need to understand, I'm not holding a brief for Air India, but if aviation is a dynamic concept, if it was considered appropriate to tweak this FDTL and FTL and undertake what has been termed by Pankaj as an experiment, risk analysis experiment, okay with it. But get the stakeholders on board.
Correct.
Get the regulators okay.
It is this lack of transparency which is the problem.
Absolutely. Because unless you get the pilots, I don't know whether the crew member who came on this channel is a flyer, is a pilot, or is he a cabin crew?
Yes, he's a crew member. He's a crew member who's flown on the sector.
Okay. No, the crew members also operating crew, as Kanu Gohain said, and the cabin crew.
Yes.
Now, operating crew are the consultative mechanism. There is also the fact, as has been rightly brought out, that it's not just a landing problem. Before landing, you could have a very, very unusual...
An in-flight emergency. Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
The level of tiredness is which is determined by aviation doctors. In our case, it is the Indian Air Force. It's Air Force Central Medical Establishment, which clears pilots for flying and also is fully aware with international aviation. None of them have been consulted. It is said that DGCA has given an oral dispensation. This is the usual joke.
It is
absolutely bizarre.
It is a situation where, accountability, it's almost dangerous. It's almost frightening for anyone who actually looks at the story that Pankaj has actually, put out here. Because, in Pankaj's hand, I've got some of the documents that Pankaj has been able to access. I've got them here with me, the RTI reply as well as what Air India is saying about this entire issue. But Pankaj, we're running out of time and we're going to expand this story over the next couple of days. But I want to put the last word to you, Pankaj. Is there any chance, like Air Vice Marshal absolutely bang on says, whether it's about the experimentation or not, there needs to be all the stakeholders on board. There needs to be complete transparency about what's happening. You can't be uncertain when hundreds of people's lives are on the line.
That's the key, in fact, Shiv, what's happening, that's what I was talking about, the culture difference that's so huge in Air India, be it the unions, various unions, and this issue has been going on for many, many years now. What's stopping Air India management to make these people sit down and decide and have a uniform platform to discussion? But this is not happening. On the other hand, let me also put in, of late, the DGCA has become very, very conspicuous on the silence that it is maintaining on the important issues. Last time round, its silence caused it downgrade by the FAA. But this time round, looking at the ground zero realities, it again seems that DGCA will have a very hard finding with the FAA.
Well, this is one story that we're not going to let go of. This and the other instances of lack of accountability, wishy-washy answers given by either the Civil Aviation Ministry or by the national carrier, they're simply not acceptable anymore. Maybe at some time in the past they were acceptable. They're simply not acceptable anymore because people want answers and they are owed answers, especially given everything that you hear about how dangerous civil aviation is. The story, obviously, the truth is somewhere in the middle. You've got pilots and crew saying one thing, you've got the Civil Aviation Minister saying another. The truth is what we will bring to you here on Headlines Today as part of an ongoing series of investigations that Pankaj Upadhyay and his team will carry out right here on Headlines Today. Air Vice Marshal Kak, Kanu Gohain and Pankaj, thanks very much for joining me on this brief discussion, because we will continue to bring you the best analysis of what these stories mean as well.